Dan and Selena. They met in their early 20s. Dan was quiet, respectful, a man of routines and responsibility. Selena was his opposite in every possible way. Fiery, unpredictable, seductive without trying, and so alive she could light up a room just by walking in. They were that couple, the one everyone else admired, sometimes even envied. Friends called them soul mates. Families boasted about them at weddings. But people don't change all at once. It's gradual, almost invisible. Dan got busier at work, taking on bigger roles at his finance firm. Promotions meant more money, yes, but also more late nights, more stress and fewer shared moments. Selena, who once admired his ambition, began to resent it. She was lonely. The candles at dinner stopped being lit. The handwritten notes became post-its reminding her to pay the electricity bill. The passionate late-night talks were replaced with silence, Dan too tired, Selena too hurt to speak. Still, there were no screaming matches, no affairs. Just a slow drift apart, like two people stranded on separate islands with no bridge left to reach each other. Selena started spending more time with her girlfriends. At first it was harmless, a few wine nights, Netflix binge sessions. But soon she was dressing up more, clubbing, posting selfies with captions that subtly hinted at dissatisfaction, healing, not hoping, learning to love myself again. She said it was just aesthetic. Dan believed her. Until one night, everything imploded. It was a Saturday. They were supposed to go out for dinner. Dan had come home late from work again, tired shirt, half untucked, dark circles. Under his eyes, Selena was already dressed up, tight black dress, heels too tall for a casual evening. She didn't even look at him when he walked in. Dan dropped his bag and muttered, "Give me 10 minutes to shower." Selena, still not looking up, said coldly, "Don't bother, I'm going out." Dan blinked. Confused. What? "I thought we were doing Italian tonight." Selena laughed mockingly. "Italian with a man who can't even look me in the eyes anymore." That's when the spark ignited. Dan tried to stay calm, but the fatigue was choking his patience. "You're the one always out, I barely see you anymore," he shot back. She finally looked at him, eyes brimming with bitterness. "Because I'm tired of coming second to your king job. I miss being desired, Dan. You used to touch me like I mattered. Now you treat me like furniture." Dan sighed. "Don't turn this into a drama, Selena. We can talk like adults." But she wasn't done. She stepped closer, voice now trembling, not from fear, but fury. "Your mother was right. You're just like your father. Cold, controlling, empty." That one line shattered something ancient in Dan's chest. His father had been an abusive man, one Dan spent his entire life trying not to become. His biggest fear wasn't failure, it was becoming that monster. And now Selena had said it, used it against him. Dan's face twisted in disbelief. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this," he growled. Selena tilted her head, smug and cruel. "She coddled you into this weak little man you are. And then that happened. A single slap. Open palm. A loud, sickening sound, the kind of sound that silences everything around it. Time froze. Selena's hand went to her cheek. She wasn't crying, she wasn't yelling. She just stood there, stunned. Then her lips curled into something dark. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she whispered. She grabbed her purse and stormed out the door, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. Dan stood frozen, his hand trembling. It wasn't who he was, it wasn't what he ever wanted to be. But in that moment, he had snapped, and he knew even before the door slammed shut that Selena wasn't just going out, she was going to destroy him. She needed revenge, not just to feel better, but to feel powerful, worshipped, desired, and she knew exactly how to get it. She wasn't going out to forget what happened, she was going out to make sure he never would. And that night would become the first chapter in a chain of horrors no one could have imagined. Selena didn't cry that night. She didn't break down, she didn't look back, not even once. Her face was still stinging from the slap, but her heart was colder than it had ever been. It wasn't about the pain. It was about the insult, the humiliation, the confirmation that her marriage. There's now nothing more than a prison, one built by neglect, silence, and now violence. She wasn't running away. She was charging toward revenge. It was PM when she entered the neon club downtown, the kind of place that pulsed with desperation disguised as thrill. Dark corners loud. Us swirling neon lights that mask regret until the morning. Selena hadn't been here in over a year, but tonight it felt like home. A wicked, dangerous home where no one knew she was a wife, where no one would see her as anything but stunning, wild and free. She downed her first shot before her coat even came off. Then another. Then another, each one dulling her shame, each one feeding the roaring voice in her head. He hit you, he belittled you, he made you feel invisible. Now it's your turn. The bartender, a slick guy with tattoos and a pierced eyebrow, asked if she was okay. She smiled with blood-red lips and said, "I'm better than I've ever been." That's when Anthony walked in. He was impossible to miss. Tall, muscular, charismatic skin glowing under the strobe lights, wearing a confidence that made every woman turn. He wasn't just attractive, he was magnetic, and he noticed her immediately, the way she looked too angry to cry. The way she stared into her drink like it owed her something. The way she leaned forward, daring the world to test her. Anthony slid into the seat beside her like he belonged there. "That drink's not treating you right," he said smoothly. Selena turned, met his gaze. "Neither is my life." That's all it took. One broken sentence. One mutual recognition of hurt, lust, and opportunity. They began talking quickly, flirtatiously, unapologetically. She didn't mention Dan, not once. Anthony didn't ask. He didn't need to. Her eyes told him everything, that she wanted danger, that she wanted to be worshipped again. That she wasn't looking for comfort, she was looking to burn the world down. They left the club together within an hour. It started in the alley behind the building, Selena pinned against the brick wall, making out with a stranger like she was possessed, her mind blank, her body reckless, her heart pounding like a war drum. The cold night couldn't numb her. Nothing could. From there they stumbled into Anthony's car back seat, windows fogged, loud, messy, her lipstick smeared across his neck, her wedding ring left on the dashboard. She had never felt more powerful. But Anthony, he wasn't just a one-night stranger. He was the kind of man. We noticed opportunity, and he saw something in Selena, something desperate and unhinged. He decided to push the line further. "You ever been upstairs?" he asked afterward, lighting a cigarette casually. Selena, still adjusting her dress, said upstairs, where the VIP lounge, you meet the real boys. "Out there," he said with a grin. She laughed. "You trying to sell me something?" Anthony leaned in close. "Nah, I'm trying to give you what he never could." She didn't ask who he was. It didn't matter. She knew what he meant. That's how she met the rest, 14 other men, all close friends of Anthony. Different builds, different energies, but all equally bold. The VIP room was more like a secret suite. Plush couches, dim lighting, expensive alcohol, music that throbbed through your chest. They didn't know she was married either, and Selena didn't correct them. Instead, she flirted, teased, laughed. She became the sun in that room. All eyes on her, all hands reaching for her. And she let them. That night she crossed every boundary. Not just physical ones, but emotional, moral, and psychological. She wasn't trying to have fun anymore. She was trying to erase her old self. She wanted to rewrite the story of who she was. With fire. By 5 a.m., she stumbled out of the suite barefoot, heels in hand, hair tangled, eyes glazed. Her phone had 20 missed calls from Dan. She ignored them. When she reached home, Dan was waiting in the living room, his face pale, eyes red, breath shallow. Selena walked in like a storm that didn't care. "Got it destroyed." Dan stood up slowly. "Where were you?" "Out," she said, tossing her shoes. "You were at the club." She looked him dead in the eye and said flatly, "I'll do anything that makes me feel good now." His face twisted. "Selena, did you betray me?" She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just stared at him like he didn't deserve an answer. Then she walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and slept like a corpse. But this wasn't a one-time fall. It became a ritual. Every few days Selena would go out late, dress provocatively, drink herself into oblivion, and end up in beds that weren't hers. Anthony became a regular part of her life, not just a fling, but a symbol of revenge, of freedom, of everything Dan wasn't. Dan began losing sleep. He'd sit at the edge of the bed, night after night, wondering where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. He couldn't eat. Couldn't focus at work. He still hadn't told anyone, not even his closest friends, what was happening. Shame had glued his mouth shut. Every part of him wanted to believe this would pass, that it was just a phase, that she was still the woman he fell in love with. But the more he hoped, the worse it got. Selena started flaunting it. She'd leave home with her perfume too strong, come back with her makeup smudged. She'd play loud music while getting dressed, ignoring Dan's questions. She even changed the wallpaper on her phone from their wedding photo to a generic beach sunset. Dan asked her, trembling, "Why are you doing this?" She just smirked. "Because I can. It all built to a boiling point one afternoon." Selena wasn't content with sneaking around anymore. She invited Anthony and 4 of his friends to their home in broad daylight, said she was hosting a party. Rocky, the neighbor, saw them walk in 5 tall men, all unfamiliar. All entering Dan's house when he wasn't home. Rocky wasn't stupid. He had seen the decline, he'd heard the fights. That day something felt different, dangerous. So he called Dan. "Hey, man," Rocky said hesitantly. "I think you should come home now." Dan's heart dropped into his stomach. He didn't ask questions, he didn't pack a bag. He just grabbed his spare keys, got in the car, and drove like a madman. Each red light felt like a lifetime, each second felt like a decade. He knew deep down what he was about to walk into, but he didn't know that this was the final moment, the one that would R.I.P. his soul. Burn everything he built and leave behind something no one would ever be able to undo. The moment Dan's car screeched into the driveway, the silence around him felt eerie. It was the middle of the afternoon, sun blazing, kids playing faintly somewhere down the block. But for Dan, the world had already stopped spinning. His palms were slick on the steering wheel. He hadn't blinked the entire drive. Rocky's voice still echoed in his mind. "I think you should come home now." His instincts were screaming. Not paranoia, not suspicion. This time, it was certainty. Something had crossed a line. Something irreversible. He stepped out of the car and stood still for a second, heart pounding in his throat. The blinds of his own house were shut. The door is locked. That never happened in the middle of the day. Never. Dan didn't knock. He used his spare key, the one he never thought he'd need. The lock clicked open with a dry, chilling snap. As he stepped inside, the house smelled different. Musky like alcohol and cologne, a strange mix of expensive deodorant and sweat. The kind of scent that doesn't belong to a husband and wife, the kind that signals betrayal. He took a slow step forward, then another. The living room was empty, but signs were everywhere. 6 glasses on the table, one half filled with whiskey, another with lipstick on the rim. He walked past the kitchen. Selena's heels were on the floor. Her scarf was draped over the couch. There was a man's jacket hanging on the chair, not his. His vision tunneled. Then came the sound, software muffled, but unmistakable moans. Rhythmic, faint, but enough to drive a knife through his chest. They were coming from upstairs. He stood frozen for several seconds. Every heartbeat felt like a gunshot inside his rib cage. He could have walked away. He could have screamed. He could have broken down in the living room, cried like a child and left forever. But Dan was no longer Dan. He wasn't the gentleman who once wrote her poetry. He wasn't the loyal man who defended her to his parents when they warned him she was too unstable. He wasn't the forgiving man who begged her to choose love over lust. That man had died. Quietly, night after night, and what remained was a storm, Dan climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. The moans grew louder, laughter now. A male voice said something crude. Selena's voice followed, teasing, playful. It wasn't just infidelity, it was mockery. Enjoyment, disrespect at its rawest. He reached the bedroom door. It was shut. He placed his trembling hand on the doorknob, not turning it right away. His breath was ragged. His ears were ringing. He whispered to himself, "Please let this be a lie." But it wasn't. He turned the knob, pushed the door open, and the world ended. Selena was in the center of the bed, tangled in the sheets, completely naked. Around her were 5 black men, equally undressed or half-dressed. Anthony was there, closest to her, his back to the door. The others were still laughing, drinking. In bottles like this was some kind of celebration, like his home. His bed was now their playground. Everyone froze. The room turned to ice. Anthony turned around and stood up quickly, hands raised. "Yo, dude, wait. We didn't know she was married. She invited us." Selena didn't move, she didn't scream, she didn't cover herself. She just stared at Dan's face, blank. And then she smirked. Dan's entire face twitched. "You made me do this," she said flatly. No remorse, no shame, just accusation. Dan's lips parted. But no words came. His knees nearly buckled. Anthony tried again. "Look, man, this is your issue, not ours. We didn't force her. Ask her what she did at the club last week. She fed 15 guys, bro 15. Selena didn't deny it. She just shrugged. What did you expect? You stopped touching me years ago." Dan's expression changed completely. His breath slowed, his eyes hollowed. He walked back downstairs. No one moved. For a moment they thought maybe he was leaving, but he wasn't. He went to the kitchen, opened the drawer under the stove, pulled out the long, curved stainless steel knife. He walked back up, silent, expressionless. The door slammed shut behind him and locked. The men stood up immediately, shouting, backing away. "What the hell are you doing, man? Chill out." Selena stood too, panic finally setting in. "Dan, don't do this. This isn't the way." But Dan didn't answer. He lunged at Anthony first. Full force, like a possessed animal, the knife went straight into Anthony's side. The others jumped in to pull Dan back, but he was beyond human at that point. Driven by pure, inhuman rage, he elbowed one in the jaw, kneed another in the stomach, and stabbed again. And again. Blood sprayed across the sheets. Anthony screamed, then went silent. The second man tried to run, but Dan grabbed him by the neck and slammed him against the wall, the knife cutting across his throat like butter, gurgling, collapsing. Selena screamed, now, shrieking at the top of her lungs, but Dan didn't even flinch. The third man managed to land a punch, but it only fueled him. Dan tackled him to the floor, sat on his chest and stabbed his chest repeatedly until there was no resistance. The fourth tried to reason. "Yo man, she's crazy. We didn't know she was married." Dan stabbed him in the face once, twice, until the body stopped twitching. The fifth man was cowering in the corner, leading, weeping, "Please. I didn't touch her. I didn't know." Dan walked toward him slowly, blood dripping, hands soaked, shirt torn. The man whispered, "Please don't, please." Dan looked down, breathing heavily, and said coldly, "You shouldn't have come into my house." Then he ended him. The room was silent again, except for Selena's panicked, choking sobs. She was backed into a corner, naked, shivering. Dan turned toward her. He was shaking now, not from fear but from exhaustion, physical and emotional. Selena tried to reason, trembling. "I was lonely. Man, I was hurting." Dan dropped the knife to the floor with a metallic clink. He sat down at the edge of the blood-soaked bed, looking at her just staring. "You destroyed me," he whispered. She wiped her tears. "You slapped me first. You let me rot in this marriage." Dan nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I failed you. I failed myself. A pause. But you took it further. Selena stood up slowly, wrapping the bedsheet around her. Please, just let me go, please. Dan turned and looked at her one final time, and what he saw wasn't the woman he married. It was a stranger. You don't get to live with what you've done, he whispered. He picked up the knife again. Selena screamed, tried to run, but Dan grabbed her hair from behind, yanked her down, and in one swift, brutal motion, stabbed her deep in the abdomen. She let out a ragged gasp, then another, and then. He went limp. Dan sat there covered in blood, breathing like a dying man. The smell of metal, the sound of dripping blood, the taste of tears. He finally looked around the room. 5 bodies, 1 wife, a war zone of love turned massacre. His soul had just killed itself. And now, only the consequences remained. Dan sat there for hours, literally hours. His phone was on the nightstand, untouched. The knife lay by his side, sticky and red, catching sunlight through the crack in the blinds. The bodies, 6 of them, lay sprawled across the bed, the floor, the walls. His wife was closest, her eyes wide open, her mouth slightly parted. She didn't scream in the end, not after the last stab. Just a silent collapse. Just the softest gasp, then nothing. Dan didn't feel like he was in a house anymore. It felt like a void. A bloody, quiet void where time didn't exist. His body trembled uncontrollably. The room smelled like rust and sex and death, and silence screamed louder than anything. It was some time past sunset when Dan finally moved. He stood up, barefoot. His legs were stiff. He walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and stared at himself in the mirror. His face looked alien. Hair matted with sweat, blood streaks across his cheeks, his eyes, once soft and tired, now cold, sunken and numb. He picked up the phone with shaky fingers, dialed 100. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse like gravel. This is Dan Myers. I killed my wife. 25 men. I'm at 232N, Ridley Lane. Please send someone. Then he sat back down on the floor and waited. The sirens began wailing 10 minutes later. The neighbors had already gathered by the time the police arrived. Red and blue lights flashed across their confused, horrified faces. No one had seen. Can come out. No one had seen Selena for days, but now the whole block was alive with whispers, murmurs about cheating, about screams, about murder. The officers entered cautiously, guns drawn, expecting chaos. But Dan didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He was just sitting in the hallway, soaked in blood, looking down at his hands like they didn't belong to him. He didn't flinch when they cuffed him. He didn't blink when they read him his rights. He just whispered one thing, barely audible. She smiled when I caught her, she smiled. The interrogation room was cold and clinical. 2 officers. A table. A recorder. Dan told the entire story, from the slap to the club, from the 15 men to Anthony, from the moaning upstairs to the rage. Every word was heavy, every sentence soaked in disbelief. Even from him. It wasn't an angry confession. It was a man bleeding through his throat. She wasn't just cheating, Dan said slowly. She was performing it, repeating it, throwing it in my face like a trophy. The officers asked the same question over and over. Why didn't you walk away? Dan finally said. Because by the time I found the strength to, I was already in hell. The news broke the next morning. Husband kills wife and 5 men in brutal domestic massacre. Every newspaper ran the story. Every radio host discussed it. Talk shows debated it for weeks. People were split. Some painted Dan as a psychopath, a man who couldn't handle rejection, who committed racialized hate. Driven violence in a jealous rage. Others weren't so quick to judge. Details leaked about Selena's behavior, about the affairs, the neighbors' whispers, the missed signs, the emotional torture, the humiliation. Online forums erupted. No excuse for murder, but what she did was beyond betrayal. Imagine the psychological toll, he snapped. Selena played with fire and got burned. Sadly, others died too. But the law. The law wasn't about opinions. Dan's trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed, not just with the public, but with tension. Dan appeared thin, hollow like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His lawyer pleaded temporary insanity, citing emotional trauma, severe provocation, and Selena's prolonged infidelity as triggers that shattered Dan's psyche. The prosecution, however, painted him as cold and calculated. You didn't just kill in the heat of the moment. The DA said you went downstairs, you retrieved a knife, you locked the door. You chose to kill 6 people, one by one. Dan didn't argue when the judge gave him a chance to speak. Dan stood slowly, hands folded, voiced steady. "I'm not asking for pity," he said. "I love my wife. Even when she hated me, I begged her to come back to me to stop. She wouldn't. And when I found her that day in that room, something in me broke. I don't even remember how I killed them. I just snapped. I'm sorry to their families, and I'm sorry I didn't walk away when I had the chance. But I can't say I regret protecting my dignity." A long silence followed. Some people in the audience wept. Others turned their heads away. The jury deliberated for 4 days. In the end, the verdict was guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. Not premeditated, not planned, but violent. Excessive and irreversible, the sentence life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Dan didn't cry. He didn't react. He simply nodded, whispered thank you, and walked back to his holding cell. Life in prison changed him. He kept to himself. Read books, wrote letters to the families of the men he killed, to the state, to no one. Dozens of pages filled with reflections, regrets, and questions that never had answers. "I wonder what would have happened," one entry read, "if I had just left. Would I have healed, or would I have rotted in silence? Anyway," another said, "I still see her eyes at night. Not the ones from the wedding, the ones just before I stabbed her. She didn't beg, she didn't say sorry. She looked at me like she won." The guard said he was polite, quiet. Some inmates avoided him, others respected him, but no one ever tried to mess with him. There was something cold in his eyes now, something beyond fear. Back in the neighborhood, the house was sold. Within 3 months, a new couple moved in. Young, newly married, oblivious. But some neighbors never forgot. Rocky moved away a year later. Couldn't sleep. "I still hear the scream sometime," he told a friend. Before he left, "If I hadn't made that call, maybe things would have gone differently. Or maybe they wouldn't have." Years passed. Dan's name became a cautionary tale. To some, he was a murderer; to others, a broken man in a marriage that tore him apart. But to everyone who heard the full story, one truth remained. Love doesn't always end. The silence. Sometimes it ends with a scream, a blade, and a man who finally said enough. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.